Everybody, my name is Jackie Mudd. Thank you all for joining us this evening to celebrate the launch of Eleanor Limprecht's new book, The Coast. She's in conversation tonight with Poppy G. It'll be preceded by a short literary salon in which 3 writers will read 3 minutes from their work. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Yuwaalaraay and Turrbal people, and traditional owners of the lands from which people are zooming in tonight. I also pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that we are on unceded land. So a little housekeeping before we begin. People who are here in person tonight, if we could ask you to turn your phones to silent. You're welcome to, of course, keep them on. And if you wish to tweet, we are at Avid Reader 4101. Anybody requiring the toilet, you're welcome to just head through that gate a few meters down the way towards the light. There is a bar, most of you have found it. It will open again briefly after this session, so you can share a drink and talk about hospitals. There will be a Q&A following the talk. For the purposes of Zoom, we're not sharing the microphone around, so we ask the chair to repeat any questions asked for the benefit of the Zoom audience at home. For those of you who are here on Zoom, you can also ask questions using the chat box. We'll be pasting a link that you can use as well to purchase a copy of the book online. If you'd like it signed, we can ask the author to do that if you put your order in during this event. Everybody else, of course, there will also be an author signing afterwards, and books are available at the counter. So it's time for the first of our salon readers. We'll begin with Rory Hawkins, who's an English Irish-grown and Meanjin Brisbane-based creative writing student in his 2nd year at QUT. In his writing, he loves exploring ideas of expectations, perspective, and the everyday weird. You can find his prose and poetry work online with QUT's Scratch That magazine, Glass magazine, read aloud with QUT Lit Salon, and through his Instagram at Rory_writes_sometimes. Please make him welcome.
This is from a short story I'm currently working on called Slowly Sinking In. A half cap does wonders for thinking. You don't want any more at once, short supply on the road and all, but I took it in the servo bathrooms. I left Jack and the bickering couple for mold and rust and knew today wouldn't be getting any better. Sunny's on just in case. When Ada asked what for, I said, "So you can take the front seat, babe, so you have room to breathe." And she mewed like a pup and slipped her arms around me. "I'm so sorry. You know what he gets like sometimes. Stan sees a problem, and if you can't fix it, I know you, Ada," I didn't say. "I know this isn't about the car." Jack saw me cradling her, gave him a hand, shoe, and a wink to send him off, but he still wandered over. Youth must have missed the wink. Sunnies. Half-capstoned is like when you're trying to make homemade soap. You have this fleshy brew on the hob, stinging more than smelling, even when you followed the recipe. So you decide to churn in your next botanic eye of newt or wing of bat, not your grandmother's botanical, lavender or lemongrass, but a bush leaf some yuppie prick would probably think the flavor is gin with. It doesn't bubble so much as fizz, like a sherbet dream, not on your tongue tip the tips of spirit fingers tracing the synaptic folds of the brain. This cloud sings to your nose and you can't help but hum along. It plays in tune with the glass-beaded crucifix jangling from the rearview mirror. It sounds like my old Fleetwood Mac CD that the stereo just won't play, and no one feels like using their phones instead. So, hum. "Freddie, you good?" That's Ada in the back seat. Words pooled in my mouth. "Just a little tired, us all. Thank you."
Our next reader, Jess Woods, is a 2nd-year creative writing student at Queensland University of Technology, having decided to settle in Brisbane after several years living and working abroad. She's interested in exploring personal experience and challenging social expectations through works of memoir and fiction. She's read at the QUT Literary Salon, and her work also appears in Scratch That. Please make her welcome.
All right, this is part of a work of domestic noir that I'm currently working on. 2 a.m. and I'm wide awake. Restless with insomnia, my fingers twitch towards my phone, but I fight the urge and instead lie quite still, feeling all the places that the springs in this old mattress dig into me like tiny punishments. Then I notice how the orange glow of the streetlight through the Venetian blinds makes prison cell shadows on the walls. These ironies aren't lost on me, but let's not start there. Let's start with the crying, the baby crying. Right there on the other side of the wall, little Leo, so close I could reach through and hold him. I picture his little button nose and his eyes soft with sleep, the hungry tears rolling down his cherubic cheeks as he calls out for milk. He's gone quiet now, though, so I imagine he must be suckling at Rachel's breast as she rocks him gently, like I'd watched her do every time she'd invited me over for coffee this past 6 weeks. She and her husband had recently moved in next door, bringing with them all the pieces of a life that is perfect, including that perfect baby boy. I glance at the pot plant in the corner of my bedroom that I keep forgetting to water, and the few well-thumbed paperbacks on the bookshelf, then reach for the glass that sits on the floor because I don't have a bedside table yet. 8 months ago, I moved in here with only a suitcase and a bottle of Merlot, convincing myself I could build a new life out of secondhand furniture. Well, cheers to that, I toast myself as I take a sip of water. I must have drifted off to sleep at some point because I hear my phone ringing from a great distance as though I'm somewhere underwater. The sound tugs at my consciousness until I open my eyes fully awake. I roll over and glance at the clock, 7 a.m. The phone keeps ringing and I scramble around amongst the sheets until I find it. Hello, I say, rubbing sleep from my eyes. It's me, Rachel, she says, sounding strained. What's up? I ask. Oh, Ellie, I'm sorry to call so early, but can you watch Leo? Fred's away on business and I have to go out. Of course, I smile, thrilled by the thought, and then I frown. Is everything okay? Yes, she says hesitantly. I just have to run a couple of errands. Oh, sure, I say, thinking nothing more of it. Okay, I'll be around in 10. Leo is happily kicking around in his cot when I arrive and lets out a gurgle giggle as he reaches up towards the mobile hanging above his head. Thanks for this, Rachel says, picking up her handbag and pointing to a large green bag sitting beside the sofa. Everything you'll need for Leo is in there, okay? I hope I won't be long. Got it. And we'll be fine, I say, smiling to reassure her. But hey, Rachel? Yes? Maybe just here, I say as kindly as I can, pulling a spare hair tie from my wrist and handing it to her. She laughs as she heads towards the door, stopping at the mirror on the way to pull her mess of blonde hair back into a neat ponytail. She's already at the door when she turns back and smiles. Thank God I met you, Ellie, she says. And for a moment, she looks as radiant as the Rachel I'd first met 6 weeks ago. For a moment, there she is, exactly like that ray of sunshine that comes out on a cloudy day and blindsides you into thinking that everything might be okay after all. And then she's gone, just like that. The last I ever see of her is the flare of her camel-colored coat as the door clicks shut behind her. Thank you.
Our next reader, Madison Blissett, is a writer, poet, and editor living on Turrbal and Yuwaalaraay land. She studied creative writing at Queensland University of Technology, where she's been an editor for Scratch That magazine and QUT Literary Salon. She's a project officer at Queensland Writers Centre and was selected for Express Media's 2022 Toolkit Flight Program for nonfiction. You can read her work in Glass and Scratch That magazine and follow her writing journey at words.with.bliss on Instagram. Please make her welcome.
Thank you very much. This is a little piece I wrote for Scratch That magazine in our zine and online as well. It's called Intangible. It was hard to notice at first. I had a lot of practice in avoidance. I dodged mirrors and slept with a pillow folded between my knees like my weight was intangible, but really my actions were just routine. A routine so very tangible, you'd realize halfway through the day that your school skirt had twisted around your waist. Your zipper sitting on your navel and a heat rising from your torso up to your neck and cheeks and forehead where sweat beads formed, a constriction in your lungs that never really went away. It was Christmas Eve when I first saw a video of myself. My dad connected his iPhone 6S to the television in an attempt to prove his tech savviness. He'd been filming us during the day, my brother's opening presents, the videos spanning across the room, until he called me. I was limping towards the kitchen to grab a ham and cheese croissant. My back was to the camera, a spine on stilts. I knew something, maybe everything, was about to give. The girl in the video didn't look like me, didn't feel like me. It was a relief to look away, for her to fade from memory. I watched Mum blow her nose into a few squares of toilet paper. There was a streak of blood in her snot. She saw me staring and she quickly folded the toilet paper into her sleeve, turning her attention back to the next video on the telly. I wore a shapeless Mauve sweater to my all-girls Catholic college. While most girls complained about the school's severity and uniform policy, I was secretly glad for the opportunity to blend in. When it came to school picture day, the teachers often ignored the lank curtains dangling around my cheekbones. The cheekbones also happened to be blushed, contoured, and dusted with highlighter. At the age of 15, I thought I was part of an advanced elite, a form of favoritism from the teachers. I worked hard, I received rewards, I was special. I felt less controlled by this force I was supposedly fighting, but I hadn't realized this brushing off the rules set me further apart from my peers. The side eyes and eye rolls, they were all too often marched up to sick bay to strip their faces off with my cellar water and a fistful of cotton wool balls. It became common to see clusters of teenage girls spitting through the hallways. They'd quickly disappear through various doors, but not before casually raking me with a head-to-toe scan that communicated animosity. They tossed their luscious salon dye ponytails behind their shoulders as if to say theirs was more genuine than mine, and I pulled down my saucepan hat over my drawn-on brows. Hunching my shoulders, I continued on, hoping my hairline hadn't creeped back. Despite my distortion from girls, I noticed after a 3-week absence, they'd given me gifts, cinema vouchers, flowers, and one time a glass jar of handwritten notes. A Tiffany blue ribbon was tied around the jar like it was trying to court my affection. Wrote me in. The afternoon of the Creative Spectacular, a competition of drama performances between schoolhouses. I hopped around on my crutches, receiving hugs and gift bags and an apology from the girl I had German class with. Apparently she started a rumor about me 2 years ago, and I'd never even heard of until then. Thank you.
It's now time for the person of the hour and their conversation partner, who I invite to make their way in slow motion to the stage as I read their bios, beginning with the author, Eleanor Limprecht. Born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in the United States, Germany, and Pakistan before moving to Australia in 2002. She's the author of The Passengers, Long Bay, and What Was Left, which was shortlisted for the ALS Gold Medal. Her short fiction and essays have been published in various places, including Best Australian Stories, Sydney Noir, Griffith Review, Kill Your Darlings, and The Big Issue. She's been the recipient of various residencies, scholarships, and grants, including from the Australia Council, Copyright Agency, and the Australian Society of Authors. Works as a lecturer in creative writing at UTS. She's in conversation tonight with Poppy G, the author of 2 literary thrillers, Vanishing Falls and Bay of Fires. Both are set in Tasmania, where she grew up. Poppy has worked as a newspaper journalist and sub-editor, chief sub-editor of Girlfriend magazine, Courier Mail book reviewer, and she's taught journalism at QT. She's a Master of Philosophy and Creative Writing from the University of Queensland. Poppy is currently publishing her latest manuscript, a psychological thriller in which housewives are mysteriously disappearing from a leafy tropical suburb of Brisbane.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing this fabulous evening with Eleanor and I. I want to welcome the Zoom audience, people at home, and I know there's at least 3 book clubs that are here tonight, so I want to give a very warm welcome to the book clubs and the Brisbane writers. There's many Brisbane writers I can see in the room tonight, so big warm welcome to you. And I know some of Eleanor's dearest friends have come out tonight to celebrate the launch of this magnificent novel, The Coast. So thank you very much for joining us. Congratulations, Eleanor.
Thank you, Poppy, and it's such a delight to be in conversation with you.
So Eleanor and I have known each other for about 20 years, and this, I'm so proud of Eleanor. We've known each other since we were cadet journalists at a newspaper in Sydney, and we used to sit in the newsroom on deadline dreaming of being authors. And it's amazing. I feel amazed to be sitting here tonight with Eleanor as she has published her 4th novel. So huge congratulations. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Poppy. And Poppy was always an inspiration to me. She was the one who would wake up at 5 in the morning to write, which I never quite had the wherewithal to do.
When did you do yours when you were working?
I didn't. Which is why I had to stop being a journalist.
Sometimes you can do it at your desk. Yeah. You just have to Word documents going.
She was also my editor for a while, and Poppy ran a tight ship. So I didn't have time to write stories at my desk.
No, because Eleanor was the best writer on the team, so she did have a big workload. So Eleanor and I met as 23 or 4-year-olds, and we soon discovered that we had a lot in common. So we both lived in Glebe, and we lived, if you know Sydney, there was the Roxbury Hotel and the Nag's Head, and we lived, those 2 pubs were between our houses. And so we both were dating young men who were builders. We both ended up marrying these young men. And then we had our children within like a month of each other. We both had a daughter and then a son. And in 2013, we both published our first novel.
Poppy did all these things first, I think. So
I think so, except then Eleanor started winning all these amazing awards and grants and residencies. And so I'm hoping that we are still in sync. So how are you feeling? Because I know you were at Sydney Airport this morning and you saw your book on the book stand. That must be an amazing feeling.
It is. It's really exciting. I love to see it. I do. It is a strange feeling when you've spent so long with this thing in your head and on your computer to then see it out in the world. And it's sometimes a little bit scary, but it's also really wonderful too. And I know now, this being my 4th go round, that you have this brief period of time in which to kind of enjoy that. So I'm trying to enjoy it as much as possible. And I think as well, because I know we've had these 2 years of COVID, to be able to have these in-person events is really special. And I feel very lucky for that.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster, and actually reminds me a bit of when you have your children and the first baby, it's quite nerve-wracking, and then it gets a little bit easier. And often people say with their last child, that was the easiest one because you weren't so anxious all the time. So Eleanor has published 4 books. The first one is What Was Left, and the second one was Long Bay, both published by Sleepers Publishing. And then she moved to Allen and Unwin and published The Passengers, and then recently The Coast. So let's talk about The Coast. That's what we're here to celebrate tonight. It starts in 1926, and we have Alice, who reveals that she has been 16 years captive. What does that mean?
So she has been kept in a lazaret, which was a small leprosy colony at the Coast Hospital in Sydney. And she's been kept there because there was the Leprosy Act in New South Wales, which came in 1890. In Queensland, it came in 1892, and it was compulsory segregation and detention of people who were found to have leprosy. So they were taken away often by police, and they were required to be isolated. And because there was no cure, it was often a lifetime detention in either sort of a lazaret or in a leprosy colony. There were a lot of also island leprosy colonies in Australia as well. But the Coast was not. The Coast is at Little Bay, if any of you know Sydney. And it's to the south of Sydney. It's a beautiful beachside suburb, but very isolated at the time from the rest of Sydney.
And then there was a lazaret at Peel Island, which we'll talk about in a little while. So that's in Moreton Bay. So Brisbane has its own history, and part of the novel is set on this island in the leprosy lazaret.
Yes, yeah, or the leprosy colony at Peel.
So when I started reading your book, I felt like I knew a lot about leprosy, and I felt like I knew that it was highly contagious, and that, you know, your fingers, I had some ideas about it. I realised I was wrong and I misunderstood a lot of it. So can you talk a little bit about what is leprosy? How do you catch it? How did it come to Australia? And why is it no longer here?
Well, it is still here. It's called Hansen's disease. Okay. Now it is curable. it still does exist. It's a lot more rare, but it is curable. And it is a bacterial, it's a bacterial disease and a bacterial infection, and it is not highly contagious. But what it does do is it causes a lot of nerve damage. And so your fingers and toes don't fall off, which is a common misconception. But you do lose the senses in your nerves. You don't feel things, and you injure and burn and do other things to your fingers, toes, your external sort of limbs. And the other thing that happens as well is it causes a softening of the bones too, which is why you see those shrunken sort of and clawing hands and misshapen. So it causes deformity, which is one of the reasons that people have been so afraid of it for generations and since biblical times, because a lot of, I think, the misconceptions about leprosy come from biblical passages as well around it, and the fear around that as well. So it came to Australia in the 1850s was when we had the first instances of leprosy. It's endemic in tropical places. So it came over with migrants who came over from places like India and China, places like that, where it is endemic. But then it became endemic in places in Australia as well. And so it was really interesting to the people who studied infectious diseases at the time, because they hadn't seen it begin to spread in a country before like it did in Australia. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of hype around it. So a lot of fear that didn't really need to happen as well, because as I said, it's not highly contagious. What it is it has a really long period before you become you begin to show symptoms. So it can be anywhere between 4 and 20 years before you can catch it and then not show symptoms for a really long time. And then very few people are susceptible to the disease, but it takes, it is spread by droplet, and it takes a long time of being exposed to that to people who are susceptible to catch it. So.
Because some of the most haunting scenes in the book are related to that fear and the stigma associated with the disease. For example, when they would identify that a person had leprosy, then they had to transport them to the colony. Can you talk about that? Because they're harrowing scenes.
Yes.
And maybe about Moxin as well.
Yes. Yes. So they're based on, I mean, this is based on actual things that happened. People were transported in train cars, in special things that they would put on boats, special like structures they would put on the deck of a boat, deck houses, and then those things would be burned when they got there. So they would be destroyed. To Peel Island, for instance, people were not allowed to go over in the supply boat. They were towed behind in a dinghy because they were, they were the lepers, they were the pariahs, essentially. They were the original pariahs. And so it is a book about stigma and segregation and all of those things. Moxin was a patient that is mentioned in the book. He's not in the book, but he's was a Chinese student in the US in the late 1800s who was found to have leprosy. And he was put in a train, a boxcar of a train, and he was pushed from one state into the next. And they kept pushing him back and forth until he died of starvation because nobody wanted to deal with him and nobody wanted to touch him. And this was this kind of like horror of touching these people, of dealing with them. So.
And of course, there are contemporary parallels. But when you started writing the book in 2018, COVID hadn't arrived. So how did those themes of the fear of disease, and I was thinking when we all went into lockdown, I would bring home the groceries and Bill, my husband and I was annoying. I wiped them all.
Oh, you wiped them all. Some people put them in the garage for like a week.
Yeah. There were a lot of things, and people wore gloves to do grocery shopping. And I remember I was appalled because I saw someone squeezing the avocados at the fruit shop. But it's similar, isn't it? This fear.
It's the fear of the unknown, because that was the big thing, right? Around what we now call Hansen's disease, is that it was like, that if you touch these people, you're going to get it. And that's what we felt with COVID for a while, that if we touch surfaces, we were going to get COVID. So it was the fear of the unknown that causes this sort of hysteria. And so, yes, it was so interesting to be finishing this book during that time, not just because I saw it being called the China virus. I saw like the same blame that we did with leprosy here, like it was all completely blamed on Chinese immigrants, and they said don't go to the fruit shops or the laundries and things like that. And those sorts of things were happening again. And then also this fear of touching, this fear of people who had COVID. So it was really extraordinary in that way. But then also in that the isolation that we all experienced for a short time, and obviously it wasn't much, but still there was a 5-kilometer radius, and you really had to stay within your small area. And it really made me think about what it is like to look around you, I suppose, to find because there's a lot of hope in this book as well. It's not just all about stories. But what it means to be resilient in these situations and to find beauty in what you do have access to.
Well, I think that's what I love about your writing, Eleanor, is that you take such a dark topic, and it's you're quite unflinching in how you have told that story of what is quite a dark period in Australian history. But you write with such poetry. It's so atmospheric and evocative. There's so much hope. There's so much beauty. And I feel like it's the other thing I love about your writing, it's so effortlessly. So you write, I'm not thinking about you when I'm reading. I'm so lost in the story, which is a huge compliment, because as the other writers in the room know, sometimes you're reading another writer's work and you are sort of thinking about them. But I think you sort of balance the light and the dark so beautifully. And so, yeah. I wanted to talk to you about the characters, because I think that's a good way to sort of get into the story here. So we have a mother and daughter who are locked up together at the Coast Lazaret in Sydney, Alice and Claire.
Yes, and so Claire is taken, actually her father is taken away first, Claire's father. So the thing about, while it's not a hereditary disease, if you are susceptible to it, probably your family members are as well. So it often did have multiple generations of people would be in lazarets or leprosy colonies, multiple generations of families, because then they would have caught it from one another. So the father was taken away first, and then his daughter was found to have it, and then her daughter was found to have it later. So Alice thinks that she's going to visit her mother, who she hasn't seen since she was 2 and who she can't remember. But it turns out that she's going there because they've found that she has this disease as well. So she's going there to be with her mother. So it's actually sort of a bittersweet thing, because she's been not with her mother since she was 2. And now she will be with her, but she will be away from all of her siblings and from her home, which is in northern New South Wales in Jigar Creek.
And then as Alice, as we said earlier, she'd been there for 16 years, and towards the end of that time period is when she meets a young man called Jack, or is he called Guy by the time he gets there?
He's called Guy by the time he gets there. So the other thing about the lazarets is that in leprosy colonies is that patients had to change their names when they went into them. And this was because of the stigma around having a person that you knew in a leprosy colony. So the families would be completely stigmatized if people in their communities knew that. So the person would change their name so that the families could be safe, essentially. And that a lot of cemeteries also wouldn't take them as even when they died, because of the stigma around them as well. So yes, sorry. Jack and Guy is a Yuwaalaraay man who is from Engledool, and he also was fought in World War I. And he is diagnosed up in Queensland with leprosy. So he ends up at Peel Island, and then he ends up being able to go to the Coast Hospital. And so his journey is in there as well. which was a sort of difficult decision for me to make. I had a lot of questions for myself whether I could write an Indigenous character in this story as well. But the more research I did into the story of leprosy in Australia, the more I realized that I couldn't tell that story without telling the Indigenous story as well, because it is a story of segregation, of stigma, of racism.
I was nervous when you told me that you were writing an Indigenous character. I did feel nervous. I think a lot of white writers do feel nervous. It's questions of getting it right. But then, of course, the opposite problem is if you don't do it, or if I understand he was more of a fringe character to start with. So I wanted to ask you, what did you have to consider as a white person writing?
Yes, absolutely. So I did want to do all of the community consultation that I could around it and have other readers looking at it. I was really lucky to have Yuwaalaraay author Artie Simpson reading it for me. I was lucky to go to Engledool and be shown around by Auntie Brenda McBride and have another reader who was Yuwaalaraay and Gamilaroi reader, Frances Peters Little. And they all looked at it, and any mistakes I made in it are my own mistakes. You know, I totally take ownership of them. But one thing that I was told is, like, don't make this a fringe character. Like, if you're going to do this is not a token thing. And that was really a big moment for me to say, okay, he's a part of the story as much as anyone else, and this isn't like a token thing, and I have to completely make him as much part of this. So and he is absolutely.
He's my favorite character.
Yeah.
He's beautifully imagined.
Yeah.
I think you did a beautiful job with him. And I know you've done a lot of research to get there's so many intricate, beautiful details of this particular era. I wanted to ask in particular in regards to the doctor, Dr. Will Stenger, what sort of research did you do to bring him to life? Because you found some letters.
I did. Yeah. There were some letters written to the Medical Journal of Australia from a doctor who was a doctor at the lazaret at the Coast Hospital and who was a doctor there for 20 years and really was a supporter of the patients and didn't think leprosy patients should be in isolation, that they should be locked up for life. And so I used some of those letters, referencing them as well in the story as well. The Dr. Stenger wasn't completely based on this doctor because he became a character in his own right as well. But I thought that those were important documents as well. And I also I went to the Royal College of Physicians archives in Sydney, and I just read a whole lot of of the medical references around leprosy at the time, and read lots of books and records and things like that. And after Poppy and I worked together, I was a medical journalist for a while at Australian Doctor, and that was probably very good training in that.
I always felt sorry for you when you worked there because I was working at Girlfriend magazine, so we were writing articles about like how to dress like Misha Barton, and Eleanor had to read the most intricate documents and try and turn it into a story, but clearly it's helped.
Yeah, although I was a political medical journalist, so that was I wasn't one of the medical journalists, but I still read, and I was fascinated by the how to treat section. Like that was just the most interesting section to me. So obviously, like there were reasons for that, but I think that the political medical training was helpful here actually, because this is a political disease as well. And it was tricky, the politics of how we treat people with disease is fascinating to me.
And it's a very powerful theme. I think that was one thing that I was left thinking about. You sort of how compassionate we are to treating the most vulnerable people in our society. And when you read Eleanor's novel and then you think about some of the things that have happened in the world recently, it makes you wonder that we've really learned much of a lesson. Eleanor, can we just go back to talk about your research? Because I was wondering, do you think the amount of hours you spent writing the novel compared to the amount of hours you spent researching, what's the breakdown specifically? But it's a lot of research, and you did some research here in Brisbane too.
I did. I went out to Peel Island here. I was lucky to get a Neilma Sydney travel grant, which is through Writers Victoria, and I went out to Peel Island, and I went out with Parks and Wildlife Queensland, and they took me out there on an amphibious boat. It was so cool.
What's an amphibious boat?
It like goes on water
Oh,
and on land.
I've seen that on the Gold Coast.
Yeah. It's very cool.
Yeah.
And just because at the Coast Hospital,
Yes.
they burned the lazaret when it closed in the 1960s. So there really is very little there that I could. There's a lovely hospital museum, which is staffed by former nurses, and they're mostly volunteers. Prince Henry Nursing and Medical Museum, fabulous place. If you ever go there, it's only open on Sundays. But there wasn't much of the actual structures or any of that. So I really wanted to go to a lazaret that was still standing, and Peel Island has, while it's, you know, it's sort of being repaired, it's in a sort of, some parts are in disrepair and some have been rebuilt. And I know that there's, what's the word, asbestos there, which is why it's not open to the public.
Did it feel like a ghost town?
It absolutely felt like that. And it was just eerie. There were things like all these rusted bed springs and, you know, lots of old glass bottles everywhere. There were old medicine bottles everywhere. There were animal bones. You know, all these
bottles they didn't want to remove. Is that
the
right?
bottles, they couldn't return the bottles because nobody would take bottles from a leprosy colony. So there are bottles everywhere. There are piles of bottles because they couldn't return them for the, so there are all these old bottles there. And also, I did also later, because we were in the US for a year, get to go to Carville, which is the leprosy hospital for all of the US in Louisiana. And they have all these garden beds made out of bottles for the very same reason, which is extraordinary, because they couldn't return their bottles either. So, yeah.
Wow. And so what was left there? Because I remember in the book when Jack first arrives on Peel Island and he walks down and he sees this beautiful cottage that's got a garden and lights, and he thinks that's where he's going. And then the matron says, no, that's not where you're staying. And where does she take him?
Yeah, so they had what the sort of white section where those cottages, and then what they called the coloured section, which is the non-white section. So they had these cottages with verandas and with glass and with electrical lighting. And then they had these ones which were basically corrugated iron with tin snips for windows and doors, and dirt floors for quite a long time. I think they were later concrete, but just the contrast was extraordinary when I saw that.
Are both the buildings still there?
Well, they've been, some of them have been.
Yeah.
So I know that Friends of Peel Island have been doing a lot of work out there. And and there are people that are renovating some of that history up there. Yeah. So you can see examples of what they looked like.
Yes. Yeah. So one day it might be open to the public.
Yeah.
We've still got lots of time. Yes. Can I keep going?
2 minutes away from giving you 5 minutes.
Oh, awesome. Great. I've still got lots of questions. So something that I've noticed, so I write crime novels, and you know, when you're writing a crime novel, you sort of have the crime as your scaffolding that provides something of a plot structure. And it occurred to me that you said something to me the other day that made me think the historical structure is almost the same, or provides the same type of scaffold in terms of when you're writing your story, because I know you don't plot your stories, but you still have. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process for all the writers in the room? You sort of have to, is that right? You sort of planning your story upon the historical scaffold.
Yeah, so I think it's one reason because I'm a pantser and not a plotter
that surprised me about you. I didn't know that in 20 years.
Yeah, I'm totally a pantser.
Proud of you.
I'm not a plotter. And I'm just not a planner. Anyone who knows me in real life knows I cannot plan for anything. So that's why I have to be a pantser. And also because the reason writing is exciting to me is because I'm a pantser, because I don't know what's going to happen. And I feel like I don't know that I would want to sit down at my desk every day if I knew what was going to happen. But the thing that historical novels do, rather than being kind of like out in the ocean, just having no idea where you're going and just no idea where you are, I think that they give you a map of what's there, and they don't tell you how to get from point A to point B, but there's the map and there are the things around that have happened, you know, and you figure out a way from point A to point B. But you know, this is the lay of the land, this is the way things were possibly, because historical record's not always correct, you know, and you have to look at lots of different versions. But you do have things, you know, generally happened, or things you have records for.
Yes.
And I love looking at things like asylums and prisons and hospital records and things like that, because the history we know is the history of the sort of wealthy, and generally, you know, the wealthy white man is generally the history that we have from those times, because those people were the history tellers. Whereas the history you get from those places is from more the fringes of society. And I'll just say one last thing that I find really fascinating is that you get in those places as well, women, when they went into those, women of the working class, when they went into those places, actually for the first time in their lives, maybe had a break from the domestic sphere. That they were.
What a shame that it took a life-threatening illness.
But that's something I wanted to explore with Clea in this book as well. Yes, from the kind of childbearing, child rearing, and domestic labor.
Yeah, well, because I think that came across, and how beautifully they created their gorgeous garden, and they had all their trinkets and their books and the beautiful piano, and it could have been a prison, but it really became a home.
And that's not to say that other places weren't more prison-like. But
that's true.
But the coast was,
that was at the coast. When I just wanted to tell everyone, when Eleanor launched her previous novel here at Avid Reader, it was a book called The Passengers, and it was where's the date that I wrote down?
2018.
Oh, no, that wasn't the
Oh, you know the actual date?
I just have to make it up. So the Passengers was set after World War II, and it was about all the Australian women who married the American servicemen and then went and lived in America. And so Eleanor wrote this beautiful novel sort of about these women and what happened to them when they went to America as young women, sailing off on a huge ship. Some of them never returning to Australia, and some did return. And so the night that she launched the book at Avid Reader, it was amazing. There were all these people here who were the children of the war brides. And so they came in and they had photographs and letters and documents that they wanted to show Eleanor because their mother had been an Australian war bride. It was amazing, wasn't it?
It was
really touching.
Yeah.
And so I was just going to ask you, is there anything with this particular novel that people who might have had a connection to the past that you've written about, has anything like that happened? Is something similar?
Yes, well, I was on Sydney ABC radio with Cassie McCulloch in the morning talking about the book and talking about the Coast Hospital, which then became the Prince Henry Hospital. So it wasn't just a lazaret, it was an infectious disease hospital for all of Sydney. And it didn't close, I think, until the 90s, the actual hospital itself. And so then all these people were calling in with their memories of Little Bay. And there was a woman who called in who'd worked in the lazaret. Like right as the lazaret had closed, but she'd nursed leprosy patients in the infectious diseases, the Marks Pavilion, which was the infectious diseases pavilion. So she'd nursed some of these patients that had been in there and had her memories of that. And it was extraordinary.
How old would she have been when she nursed them?
Right, and that was when she was so they did their nursing school there as well. So she was a probationer nurse. So she would have been in her early 20s or possibly even younger. So she would be in her 80s now. I don't know, math is not my strong point.
No, oh, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I love hearing those stories from the way that, you know, I mean, I obviously use history as a big springing point for my fiction, but I love to hear people who find their history told in it as well.
Because you, when you were researching the passengers, you went to America and interviewed the war brides as well, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. I did. That was extraordinary. Yeah.
What do you like more, the research or the writing?
I love them both,
yeah,
for different reasons. Yeah, I have to put I could research forever.
Yeah,
and at a certain point, I have to stop myself and say, like, okay, write the book. And otherwise, I would spend 20 years.
How do you keep track of all the information?
I have lots of Word documents.
Yeah. A messy office.
I'm not. Yes. Should we see? Is it questions?
Are there any questions that people would like to ask of Eleanor? If you would like to say the question, and then I will repeat it so that the Zoom audience can hear. Otherwise, I have got more questions. So maybe I might ask one more question, and then people can think of any questions. This is kind of a comment, which you're not supposed to do. But I do think you write historical fiction, but with all of your novels, I feel, as your friend, I've seen something quite personal of you in the novel. And so your debut novel, What Was Left, was about the struggles of being a young mother. And then Long Bay, I think, reflected the sort of the contrast between good mothers and bad mothers and societal opinions about that. The Passengers, I believe, my sort of interpretation is it's about the sacrifices that we make for love. So as we know, Eleanor was born in America, and when she was backpacking through Italy, she met her Australian husband-to-be. So that sort of was reflected in these women who married these young American servicemen and moved overseas. But it's a huge sacrifice, and there was a cost at that. So I was wondering, what's the most personal thing that you feel is in the coast, that you've put into the coast of yourself?
It was a question, probably, in the end. I think the coast, so maybe these, you know how they say you always write the same book over and over again, and
You don't.
But I return to some themes, and one is about motherhood, and there's another sort of that bad mother, good mother ideal.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And then also this idea of home and what is home, and how do you deal with living away from a place that you think of as home for a very long time. And so I think that that's a big theme in here as well. And then I always think that I write as an outsider too, and that I understand things because I have this, or I don't understand them, but I want to understand them. I ask a lot of questions, and I find them interesting because I have this, I've always been an outsider. I actually grew up in a lot of different countries, not really in the US, and I always was outside of, you know, I was always different and an outsider. And that just made me ask a lot of questions and try to understand things. And Australian history is fascinating to me because I didn't grow up with it. I don't think the history I grew up with would be as interesting to me.
Oh, I'm sure it would be, because Eleanor spent time as a young teenager in Pakistan and in Germany. Her father was a diplomat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wonder if that sort of outsider's perspective helps you to probe some of our more firmly entrenched Australian myths about our history in a way that perhaps Australian writers are not as inclined to. Do you think?
I don't know, but I do know that I am comfortable being on the outside of things. So I think that and sort of looking in and trying to figure out what's in. So yeah, that's just I think that The Coast is another book at which I'm doing that. And the big outsiders in this, of course, are people in lazarets, people with leprosy who are completely dismissed to the fringes of society. Yeah.
Mm. So ultimately, it is a love story. It's a beautiful love story where the history is weaved throughout. But it's the sort of book, it does have a very, it's a sad ending, but it's uplifting as well. I thought.
Don't tell me.
Although perhaps there's an ambiguous ending, which Eleanor suggested today. So everyone needs to read it so we can talk about the ending. We can talk about. I think maybe I misinterpreted it. Do you have any advice that you would like to give, to emerging writers? Or what would you say to someone?
I would say that it takes a while to, I think it takes a while for your taste in things. And this is something that I always tell my students. It's like an Ira Glass quote. He does this American Life, and it takes a while for your writing to come up to the standard that you see. So you can be really critical of your own work, but it's because you have a good eye for things.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because you've read a lot and you know what you like. And so sometimes if you're feeling critical and you're feeling down on yourself, just realize that, that's actually a good thing, that you have a good eye, that you have a critical eye, and work on that eye. And that is an important part of being a writer. And don't be too hard on yourself, and just put in the time. I think that resilience is probably the biggest thing. Would you agree? I mean, we've been together doing this for 20 years. You have to be resilient.
I thought we were doing it for the fame and fortune.
You have to be very
perseverance.
You have to persevere, and not to be, because rejection doesn't just come when you're a beginning writer either. It comes later too, and you just have to be you have to develop that resilience and to ultimately do it because you love the craft of it, I think.
Does it get easier as you publish more books, do you think?
I think some things get easier, but other things maybe not. Because you know more, then maybe some things are harder, but other things do become easier.
And I wanted to ask you a question which I've stolen off one of my favourite podcasts, Words and Nerds podcast. Danny V always asks her authors a question at the end. Why do you write? Can you tell us why you write?
Yes, I write because I've always expressed myself better in the written word than in the spoken word. I apologize to everyone who's
No, you're good.
But just that I've ever since I was a kid and I had to ask for something from my parents, I would write them a letter to ask for it, because that was just,
did that work?
Better than when I asked for it.
Yeah, but you're a good writer.
Well, yes. So it's always been, and actually I thought I fractured my wrist. I had to be in a cast for a little while, and I was trying to use this dictation software, and I realized I couldn't. I found it really hard because I don't speak when I'm writing. It comes, to speak it is different to me. It felt like it came from somewhere else, so I had to get used to that, and that was really difficult.
Because some writers use that.
I know, and I have
software.
so much admiration for them.
Yeah,
I found it really hard.
Have we got any questions? How are we going, Jackie?
A Zoom question. I'm not sure whether or not to ask it.
Let's do it.
Okay. Is that Eleanor on the cover?
I thought the same thing. Is this Eleanor on the cover? Because it looks a bit like her.
I don't think it's meant to be me, but maybe it is. I was not the cover designer, and I'm not ultra talented. But it's a beautiful cover. I actually think that it's meant to be. I think it's meant to be Alice on the cover. You can read the book and see what you think. People said that with the Passengers too. They thought that was me on the cover of it. It's like when you're only showing the back of someone's head or half of their face.
We're glad you don't write crime because they put a dead naked woman on it. No one will say, is that you?
Was that you, Poppy, on the cover?
On my Facebook it was a headless naked woman floating in seaweed. Anyway. You You don't get a lot of say.
I'm going to look at it again when I get home.
Yeah, that's the American cover.
Yeah, I know.
The Australian cover was not more cheerful.
Yeah.
Hopefully the Americans aren't listening. So I feel like we're coming to the end, are we? Is it nearly time for signing books, or are there any questions? Would anyone? We've got lots of questions.
Oh, sorry. I'm just interested. It's a fairly niche topic, leprosy and the history of Australia. How did you what inspired you to kind of delve further into that topic?
Yes, it is niche. And my mother...
Do you want to repeat the question?
Oh, sorry.
For the Zoom people?
Yes.
Oh, well, you can.
I'll repeat it. So the question was that it's a very niche topic, leprosy, and how did I get interested in it and to just decide to write a book about it? And like my mother said, nobody wants to read a book about leprosy. Why? And I was like, well, I'm interested and I think it's fascinating. So because I live near Little Bay, I live in Maroubra, I had gone and visited this nursing museum when I was writing a book about Long Bay. And then I discovered that they had this lazaret there and I was just fascinated by it. And I'd also read a really fascinating essay by Rebecca Solnit in Harper's about leprosy as well, which and Hansen's disease, which I really recommend. I can't remember the title of it, but it was Rebecca Solnit, who's amazing. And so it changed my perceptions on it. And I just kept thinking about it. And if I keep thinking about something, I know I have to write about it eventually. Yeah.
Thank you for asking that question. That was something I wanted to ask too. And we have another question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so from a more medical perspective, what sort of research did you do to make sure that you were accurately portraying the physical experience of having leprosy? And was that influenced by your past writing with medical, political?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So that question was from the medical point of view. What research did I do to make sure that I was representing the experience of having leprosy? And I would say that I did rely on several medical readers as well to read my book, which was helpful in that sense. And one, Elizabeth Schick-Snyder, is the curator of the Hansen's Disease Museum in Carville, Louisiana. So she actually read this manuscript and she would be the expert on this in the US particularly. So she kind of read it and gave me some feedback around that as well. But she would not have had the disease herself, but I did read a lot of memoirs. There are several memoirs of patients who did have it, and I read a lot of those as well. So that was helpful too. And then just reading all of those sort of patient records and things like that was helpful. I also had a doctor who, one doctor who was the chief leprologist in Queensland, who I interviewed and read his book as well, and then a doctor who read my manuscript as well. So yeah, I relied on lots of people for help.
And you had some thank yous you wanted to do before we ended tonight, didn't you?
Yes. So I just first would love to thank Poppy G, who is an amazing writer herself of beautiful books with amazing stories. I love them, and they just make me want to go spend all my time in Tasmania, although I feel like I would die as well. People always die. But she's an inspiration and also the most generous writing friend. And actually my first Australian real friend. So thank you, Poppy. An avid reader, I wanted to thank them for putting on this event, as well as all the events that I watched during COVID on Zoom. They're absolutely fantastic. And so I'd like to thank Jackie Ryan for introducing us as well, and Fiona Steger. And the salon readers, Madison, Rory, and Jessica for reading as well. I'd like to thank the Neilma Sydney Travel Grant, which allowed me to research Peel Island and come up to Brisbane at that time and research leprosy and Hansen's disease here. The Australian Society of Authors Blake Beckett Scholarship, which let me complete the book. My publisher, Jane Palfreeman, and my editors, Ali Lavau and Tom Bailey Smith. And here tonight from Alan and Unwin, Margaret Langenfeister. And people and resources who helped with my research in Brisbane were Hugo Reid, The Diaries of Rosemary Opala, the books of Peter Ludlow, and the work of the Friends of Peel Island. So those are all amazing if you want to read more about Peel Island. And then other Brisbane writers who've been really generous to me have been Ashley Hay, Miranda Ruwo, and Cass Moriarty, who I know couldn't all come here tonight, but they've been lovely supports. And I also couldn't have written Jack without the guidance and advice of Yuwaalaraay writer Nardi Simpson, and Yuwaalaraay and Gamilaray woman Frances Peters Little, and Auntie Brenda McBride. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you for coming. It's been a tricky few years for bookstores, publishers, and the arts generally. So for you to come out and support writing is and books in this space makes you the best types of people.
It's so true. It is. It's the best people. Storytelling is something that brings people together, and it's something we have done since the beginning of time. And so to come out tonight and all share this lovely story behind the writing of the book and listen to the emerging writers read their amazing pieces, I think it's a really beautiful thing. And so I hope it's chicken soup for the soul. I hope everyone goes home feeling amazing. And finally, we should thank Eleanor for your generosity and your thoughtful answers and for writing this beautiful, amazing book, The Coast, which I know everyone is going to love. So huge congratulations to you, Eleanor. So what will happen now is everybody, if you would like Eleanor to sign your book, Eleanor's going to go to the signing table and sharpen her pencil. And so if you can, once Eleanor's gone to the signing table, you may follow her out. I think the bar's open.
Yes, the books are available at the counter.
Buy more books.
You don't have to look for them, they're right there at the counter.
Oh, The Coast is on the counter. Perfect. So if you haven't bought a copy yet and you would like to, there's many copies available. Thank you so much, everyone. That was wonderful.
But you can do another one. I said you get one out.
Yes.
Well, you get